You are listening to a recording from the Cooperating to Build a Better Nova Scotia conference in Halifax, a celebration marking the United Nations International Year of Cooperatives.
I would like to welcome everybody who has chosen to come to this session. So it will really be an exciting discussion. We've had a great panel of distinguished experts. I promise you, you're going to have a very good discussion. So our section here today is entitled Cooperative Innovation, Policies, Practices, and Debates on Social Enterprise and Collective Entrepreneurship. And I'm going to be the facilitator. So before we start this section, what I'm going to do is quickly to introduce my panelists. And I will do that quickly, and then I will set the stage for the session. So first I'm going to introduce, I'm going to start with Mike Tickham. And Mike is the gentleman number 2 from the left there. So Mike Tickham currently works for the Nova Scotia Department of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism as Sustainable Procurement Coordinator. He is a graduate of Dalhousie University with a master's degree in urban and rural planning. His education and experience specializes in the realm of environmental management and community planning. When not consumed by research into sustainability trends and initiatives, Mike likes to spend as much time as possible on the ocean, either on a boat or a surfboard. Mike has worked for the provincial government for almost 8 years and is a past recipient of the Premier's Award of Excellence. So I told you we have a great group of people here. And then next will be Nanci Lee, who is just next by me here. So Nanci Lee has 17 years experience in the microfinance, most of which has been focused on member-owned models, such as credit unions and groups. As an educated researcher and analyst, she has worked both internationally and domestically in the areas of member governance, household and gender issues around assets, market research, financial management, financial literacy, and double bottom line reporting. It's interesting. You guys should ask her a question about triple bottom line. Why did she say double bottom line? So interesting. She was a community-based microfinance coordinator at the Coady International Institute before becoming a consultant and a program coordinator for the SAVEX database, which is the standard for financial reporting and benchmarking for savings groups worldwide. And I'm also going to introduce Gavin Fridell. He's the first person there. So he's a Canada Research Chair in International Development Studies at Saint Mary's University in Halifax, and a Research Associate at the Center for Research in Latin America and the Caribbean at York University. He is the author of Fair Trade Coffee, The Prospects and Pitfalls of Market-Driven Social Justice, and several articles and book chapters on international trade and development, fair trade, food practice, food politics, and global political economy, published internationally in English, Spanish, and Norwegian. He is currently conducting work on state-driven alternative trade mechanisms in coffee, bananas, and wheat, and has a forthcoming book with Fernwood Publishing titled Alternative Trade Legacies for the Future. And lastly is the second young lady in this group, and her name is Joanne Jose, and she's an experienced researcher, evaluator, and project manager. Joanne is the president of Common Knowledge Research and Consulting based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Common Knowledge specializes in program evaluation, gender-based analysis, and social policy research. Before joining Common Knowledge, Joanne was a research consultant with the Houlihan and Sons Incorporated. Joanne has also worked as a policy analyst for the provincial government of Nova Scotia, a research coordinator, and a researcher. She has experience designing and implementing research projects, developing and managing public consultation strategies, designing and implementing knowledge translation strategies to move research into policy practice. and conducting evaluations. Joanne has worked with provincial and federal government departments, not-for-profit organizations, women organizations, Aboriginal groups, and university research centers. Joanne has a master's degree in gender studies and social policy from the University of Leeds, UK, and has completed professional development training in evaluation, public participation processes framework. She lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia with her partner and their 2 beautiful kids. That's really sweet. So, now you are aware of the great panelists that we have. I'm just quickly going to set the stage. So, as I mentioned, we will have, normally we should have 90 minutes for this section, so they will speak, and then I will give you opportunities to engage them through a question and answer period. I will just set the stage before they start to speak. So the section, Cooperative Innovation, Policies, Practices, and Debates on Social Enterprise and Collective Entrepreneurship. We think that the late 1970s marks the arrival of new forms of communal enterprises. Some of these enterprises adapt the cooperative model, but explore new sectors such as transportation, insurance, and education that cooperatives have for so long avoided, and this is debatable. Some are more socially oriented, using market-based tools to address the ills of society. Traditional non-for-profit organizations also entered the arena by engaging in profit-making activities to strengthen their financial autonomy and become more committed to advocating their values without threats of losing financing from big corporations and governments. Others have situated themselves at the intersection of individual financial development and social justice. The trajectories are meaning and varied, but innovation, social justice, and collectivity are common characteristics. Traditional cooperatives gradually find themselves surrounded by these new collective enterprises. Government and the private sector have also begun to develop partnerships with these enterprises with the aim of achieving shared objectives. These innovative processes have not been without controversies, however. They have not only created an identity crisis, they also attracted questions of accountability, economic mediocrity, and ethics. This workshop entertains entailing case studies, debates, policy implications for academia and government and the cooperative sector. This is really interesting because cooperatives are not just here in Nova Scotia. For example, the former United Nations Secretary General Brutus Garland in his 1994 report to the General Assembly said, cooperative enterprises provide the organizational means whereby a significant proportion of humanity is able to take into its own hands the task of creating productive employment, overcoming poverty, and achieving social integration. So, ladies and gentlemen, without me trying to steal the show, I would like to give the chance to our first presenter, and that is Gavin Fridell.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here. Oh, there you go. All right. Well, in the spirit of this panel, my paper is also on mechanisms that contain cooperative values but would not traditionally be considered cooperatives. However, I'm talking for my paper more on the international level in the realm of international cooperation. I think very often this sort of non-cooperative, cooperative enterprises is focused on things like social enterprises, non-profit organizations, which I think is very important, and I'm looking forward to the other discussions. But I think there's less being said about the way that these sorts of cooperative ideals are increasingly prevalent in certain sectors internationally in the realm of international cooperation. And I think this is especially true in the Global South, where my own research is. And I'm particularly interested in the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, which I'll call ALBA, and its impact in the Caribbean, which is actually where my most recent research has been. There are 8 member countries that have signed on to ALBA. There's a couple more that might sign on in the next year or two. And it's spearheaded by Venezuela and Cuba. And they've signed a range of agreements on cooperative trade and development at the state level, as well as all kinds of official nods and promises towards promoting things like fair trade, social enterprises, social movement action, cooperatives, and local business. Now, ALBA has not necessarily realized a lot of the goals in this regard, but it's part of the official ALBA agenda. So the central premise of me looking at cooperative from this perspective is the notion that states ultimately play a very heavy and determining role in the ability of cooperatives to survive or to thrive economically, locally, and globally. And so I think it's very important for us to look at the conditions that states do or don't create for cooperatives to act. And my focus here on cooperative development draws a lot on the US economist Martin Hartz-Landsberg, who recently referred to ALBA as, quote, the most promising, if not the only meaningful attempt at cooperative development anywhere in the world. So by cooperative development here, I mean something distinct from the dominant forms of international cooperation that we tend to think of when we talk about development. And increasingly in this world, this won't come to surprise, obviously, to this audience, that international cooperation is increasingly defined as supporting free trade agreements. And free trade agreements are increasingly defined as not having very much to do with free trade. And I can discuss that, obviously, at a greater level, but I can't get into that for this short paper. But one aspect of free trade agreements is this, I would call almost a kind of obsession with reciprocity. And this is the notion that you can create reciprocal trade relations between different countries in the world, rich or poor. And international cooperation is increasingly contingent, from richer countries, is increasingly contingent on poorer ones lowering their trade barriers and complying with World Trade Organization rules, which is seeking reciprocity between all members. We all lower our barriers equally, which doesn't really happen. But the concept of reciprocity is very powerful, and I would say unattainable between poorer and more marginalized states and wealthier and more powerful ones. Now, in contrast to this, ALBA on paper promotes a variety of cooperative ideals, and the most distinct one is the notions of solidarity and the idea of placing cooperation before competition as a choice. So I've examined this in the context of the Eastern Caribbean. So one thing we have to, and the Eastern Caribbean has been particularly involved in ALBA actually. There's three countries that are members. There's Antigua and Barbuda, there's Dominica, and there's St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where I've conducted some of my earlier research. And recently St. Lucia and Suriname have both suggested they might soon join, and Haiti is become an observer member. So the context of this research has to be understood in the context of the decline of cooperative development in the Caribbean and the rise of cooperatives. And this raises all kinds of tricky challenges. For decades since the 1970s, the Caribbean economies had a preferential trade agreement with the EU. I won't get into the details explaining how this preferential trade agreement worked, but it basically gave small farmers in all kinds of industries in the Caribbean preferential access to European markets. Now, what I've studied is the banana industry in the Eastern Caribbean. And as a result of this preferential trade agreement, there emerged a fairly unique thing in the Caribbean, which is small, family-run banana farms, where the workers or the income on those farms is about 3 times what you would expect in Latin American banana incomes for plantation workers. Most, not all of Latin American bananas come from giant plantations. They're produced under very high chemical intensive ways, et cetera, et cetera. The banana farms in the Caribbean were certainly not ecologically perfect, but they used much less chemical inputs. They were family run. They made much higher income. And it was actually, as a researcher, a very distinct experience for me to see banana farmers in the Caribbean compared to coffee farmers I had seen earlier in southern Mexico. The banana farmers in the Caribbean were certainly not living the high life, but they had houses, and many of their children were off in school in Canada, in universities and things like this. Certainly experiences that I was not common to seeing in poor rural areas of Mexico. Anyways, the World Trade Organization has consistently ruled against this preferential agreement. Many countries launched a series of suits at a variety of tribunals and have ruled that it's a violation of free trade, mostly because it's not reciprocal. It's not equal. It's like Europe's given preferential access to these marginalized economies, but they ain't getting anything for it. So, as a result, Europe has reluctantly at first, and now with less reluctance, watered down the preferential agreement. It essentially is not effective anymore. And as a result, since 1992, 85% of the banana farmers in the Eastern Caribbean have gone bankrupt. Now, the interesting thing is that in the emergence of the decline of preferential trade has been fair trade bananas. Fair trade bananas have emerged in the Caribbean, and now in the Eastern Caribbean covers 90% of the Windward Islands banana farmers. But the thing we have to keep in mind is that 90% is after 85% of the banana farmers have already left the industry. And most of the farmers I spoke to characterized fair trade bananas as something that one person who said to me was little more than a reprieve from the decline of the overall industry. When I looked at fair trade coffee in Mexico, I saw farmers that had been given very little assistance from the state. Fair trade greatly improved their lives. When I saw fair trade banana farmers, what I had seen is people that for decades had been given preferential access, higher prices and things like this. That was gone. Fair trade paid them much less than they were used to getting, and probably tripled the amount of rules and regulations and the hoops that they had to jump through to meet all the fair trade and organic standards and meet the EU, various EU food standards. So I met a lot of very upset banana farmers that didn't think fair trade was all that great. But the basic context I'm saying here, because obviously fair trade has been better than nothing, is about the contradiction between the decline of cooperative development at the international level and the emergence of local cooperatives. And these local banana cooperatives in the Caribbean simply can't compensate for the decline of state-managed, internationally recognized cooperative mechanisms that used to exist, even if they were more bureaucratic, even if they were less efficient in some ways. They simply cannot meet the breadth and the reach. So under these conditions, and the Eastern Caribbean islands are in crisis now, with relatively high unemployment, among the highest out-migration of any area in the world, which is why you meet so many wonderful Caribbean people in Toronto and Halifax and around, a very high out-migration, and a general crisis in the rural and farming sector that spilled over into the islands in general. So they've been drawn towards ALBA. And one of the things that, one of the most famous projects that ALBA has, which you may or may not have heard of, is a project with Venezuela and Cuba, where Venezuela started shipping oil to Cuba in exchange for doctors. And Cuba started shipping doctors back to Cuba in exchange for discounted oil. But Cuba, of course, has done all kinds of things beyond that. They've provided health training throughout the entire region, free health services to ALBA and non-ALBA members. A reported 30,000 Cuban doctors are now providing free health care throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, and 70,000 students are receiving training as health professionals by Cubans. The Windward Islands have benefited from these, in the Eastern Caribbean have benefited from these as well. They've had people from the islands have been sent off to Cuba for Operation Miracle to have their eyes, free eye surgeries and things like this. So this is all part of the overall ALBA project, as well as PetroCaribe, which is a project of discounted oil for the Caribbean islands. Now, just two very brief snapshots to give you a sense of some of the actual projects that I've seen that are on the ground beyond this more general picture. One of them I saw was the construction right now in St. Vincent of the island's first international airport. It's very expensive and very complicated to build an international airport there. They're very hilly terrain, and they've never had one. And it's very expensive for a small island like this to construct one. Well, they're in the process of constructing one now, and one of the biggest pushes have been millions of dollars of in-kind assistance from Venezuela and Cuba in the form of engineering services, heavy machinery, wind stations, an on-site laboratory, and as well as direct funds from Venezuela, Cuba, and many others. So through this kind of interesting mechanism, they're trying to build an international airport. They will build an international airport. It'll be completed in a year or two to promote tourism, trade, and services, and other things to offset the decline of the banana industry. Now, none of that, of course, is a panacea to the decline of the banana industry, but it represents a very interesting form of in-kind assistance based on what they used to and still refer to as special and differential treatment. The idea that poorer, more marginal countries and economies require special assistance from wealthier partners. This is now increasingly not in vogue in the sort of world of neoliberal reforms. Another interesting project on the way is in Dominica, another small windward island. In 2009, the Venezuelan government shipped the components of a coffee processing plant to the island. Dominica does a little bit of coffee, but they have great soil conditions for coffee. They haven't really grown much for a long time. And the decline of the banana industry, the idea is that maybe they can now start growing coffee again. Hardly a panacea. The coffee market's hardly a wonderful market to be in, even if prices are higher right now. But the idea is to grow, I got 5 minutes, I thought I had less. The idea is to grow specialty coffee in Dominica, targeting the regional market in the Caribbean and in Venezuela, in joint ventures with the Venezuelan government. There's all kinds of interesting prospects here, one of them being that the Venezuelan government themselves has been increasing their own coffee production to meet their own domestic and regional needs. Yet despite this, rather than approaching Dominica as a competitor, they've tried to engage with that small island in cooperative ventures for Venezuela to increase its coffee production while Dominica seeks to increase its own. And providing the island with its own coffee processing facility, the idea would be is that coffee would be processed to the final stages right there on the island, which they call moving up the value chain, for local and domestic markets, regional markets, instead of being shipped to the north. Now, these two examples I've just thrown very briefly. I could obviously go into them in quite detail. Both of them are starting up. We don't know what will ultimately come of them. There's all kinds of highly contentious political and other issues around them. And of course, they don't represent an ideal answer to the decline of the banana industries. But what they represent is, as Europe is withdrawing from the Caribbean as a preferential partner and demanding reciprocity, southern countries are moving in now, offering a more cooperative vision of how they can work together, one that goes beyond a short-term market logic, and one that understands the difference between highly unequal participants. It's incredibly unrealistic to think that these Eastern Caribbean islands were going to compete on the global market equally with the United Kingdom. So just to sort of sum it all up in the end, there are a lot of weaknesses to ALBA. One of them is that the unequal power relations between different states remains. Power politics is inevitable in this world, so obviously Venezuela calls a lot more shots in ALBA than the small countries do. Well, I'll get to the but in a second. And the other one is the rather ad hoc nature of ALBA. ALBA is making all kinds of claims right now to promote cooperative production and social economy and all these sorts of things, but the transparency is not always there. The ad hoc nature in particular, governments sign different ALBA agreements, it's hard to get a cohesive picture. So we shouldn't romanticize it. But there are a lot of interesting strengths. One of them is the reassertion of the necessity of special and differential treatment for smaller partners. The other one is a notion of international cooperative development between states where all countries in ALBA get one vote, and ALBA is very conscious of the asymmetrical and unequal relationships of power between different members, which it tries to compensate for. It's just something you don't get anymore in free trade agreements, World Trade Organization, etc. And finally, ALBA is sort of part of a movement within Latin America in general to reassert the benefits of social regulation and social efficiency. And the growing legitimization of this movement in Latin America, which is contradictory and full of all kinds of different pathways, as putting human development first and aspiring for gains in health, education, and life expectancy and things like this, and other major social indicators as the ultimate drive behind the new economic models that are developing there. So in that context, the final thought is that I think it's very important to look at what these kind of broader international alternatives might have to offer for these local cooperatives and cooperative movements on the ground as a more facilitating environment for their economic and social development. And I'll leave it there.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Au début, j'ai oublié pour vous informer que nous ferons cette session en bilingue. Donc, pour nos amis qui parlent français, on a des outils là que tu peux utiliser. Now, it's Nanci Lee, sir.
Hi, everyone. I think what I'm going to present to you today is going to follow well on Gavin's presentation. He's gone macro. I'm going to bring you right down very, very small and micro. But we're going to stay international. I'm going to share with you a model of cooperative enterprise. And what we're going to look at, it's a savings group. Oh, we lost. Oh, okay. Sorry. We're going to look at a savings group and the whole sector of savings groups. Savings groups are financial service cooperatives, but they're more than just a source of loans and savings. They're also collective enterprises and a social vehicle for social capital and impacts, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So the first thing I want to do, I think it's helpful to just really take you in depth into the architecture of a savings group and how it works. These are very small, highly informal credit unions, if you like, at a community or village level. They're around the world, and they're based on informal and traditional or indigenous forms of organizing that are specific to the culture. The variations they vary widely, not only between countries, but also within communities. So I'm going to just take you through the process. So first, very sensitive. First, what happens is, like you do with a regular financial cooperative, you have meetings, and you're having a attendance call. What each member in this particular group is doing is, when they come up to say, I'm here, and they pass their passbook, they actually recite one of the aspects of the Constitution. So the bylaws and the Constitution are all decided, as they are with most cooperatives, by the members themselves. But this is a way of reinforcing that everyone's familiar with those policies. Just some interesting, a common policy that you find across these savings groups. Members should not come to meetings drunk, for example. Members should not come late. Cell phones should not be ringing. There's some interesting policies, and they change by area. Enforcing the rules, this is an example where coming in late, you have to pay a late fee, and so they put a simple little bowl or something in the doorway that if you walk through, you'll need to pay that fine. And the fines, of course, are a source of income. Other possible fines: gossiping, cell phones going off, not paying a loan on time, missing a meeting. Even there's some interesting fines that I've seen over the years with these groups. Some groups will fine if they ask a random member, what is our total amount of savings currently? And you can't answer it, you'll be fined, because they really stress the kind of governance and ownership. Members contribute, so members usually contribute to a social fund, one of the first steps in the process. Each member contributes a very small amount. Depending on the country, it might be as little as $1.50, $5. These groups are often meeting monthly. They could meet weekly. Again, all of these rules are decided by the groups themselves. But this social fund acts as an insurance fund. I should add that most of these savings groups are run by women. You'll see men in these groups, but the majority of savings groups are women. So these social insurance funds, they're used for death, for illness, for travel to funerals, for school fees, and other family emergencies. The other aspect of the social that I think is really important to emphasize, it's not just the financial that they've put aside in the form of an insurance fund. These groups play a really important social role. I've seen in India, for example, groups come together and demand the inheritance property right of a woman who's about to lose her property because her husband has passed away. I've seen groups, come together and speak to a local social court or elder about domestic violence. There's a lot of studies done related to savings groups and the impact that, I think this is pretty logical to us, but that women having their own assets and businesses in their own name have in terms of her ability to exercise her rights, both in the household and in the community. Each member saves according to their capacity. I think what's important, and I'll come back to this later, is that it's really a savings model in a world where credit and loans are becoming kind of the norm. They have incredible savings rates, so I'll come back to that. But each member is saving according to what he or she can. If they can't save at all that week or that month, they don't. But I've also seen there's wonderful celebrations around if you save the maximum amount that your group has designated as a maximum. There's singing, there's cheering, there's dancing. So there's a real kind of social incentive to save. And of course, at the end of their cycle, which varies again by group, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, there's a distribution of profits. That distribution of profits doesn't always take the form of money, and it's not always according to how much you save. It's highly culturally dependent. So I've seen in Bolivia where the women will come together and purchase bonnets. Some will be saving twice as much as someone else, but everyone receives a bonnet. In some, they'll be very financial and very exact, and they'll figure out according to the amount that has been saved, according to the shares, and according to the the contributions, including the social fund, they'll get their dividends back. And again, the groups will decide how much is reinvested and how much is going to be shared amongst the members. Now, you have to keep in mind the context of the people who we're dealing with here. Many of the women in these groups will be illiterate and innumerate in the formal sense. In other words, they're not going to be very good at double entry accounting, but they know their business. They have small businesses. They know money. So that the real governance challenge is making sure that there are books and there is a process that all members can own, regardless of where they are. So here's an example in Malawi. It's quite cute because Malawi is, of course, a fishing country highly dependent on fish, and so you can see each week. A member can see at a glance, the first week I saved the minimum amount, but on the fourth week I saved as much as is possible. And so they have a good visual understanding of their savings. There are cultural differences even in whether or not people are going to save. So the Maasai, for example, they don't like to save in money. They prefer to invest in animals or group businesses. This model is grounded in community ownership, so the backbone is mobilizers or community-based trainers. So this woman is Agata, and usually, they're young people or someone who is fairly savvy with numbers or a calculator. They may be secretaries or chairs in these savings groups that go on to help other savings groups form. How do they manage risks and transparency? We're talking 80, 100 kilometers off, the tarmac. And so this is a system that they've come up with. It's a cash box, and there are 3 different locks, and each member has 1 key. So no one member can access the cash box. There's still, I just want to emphasize, there's still a risk here. A lot of groups, some groups, I've seen groups who have as much as 3,000 US dollars equivalent in their own currency, but in this cash box at the end of cycle, because of course every week or every month they're contributing, and even though they're lending that money out to each other, at the end of the cycle when everyone's paying back, the money is accumulating. So many of the groups have made linkages with cooperatives, financial cooperatives, and banks. Come back to that. So what is community-based? We call this community-based microfinance because it's highly decentralized, highly informal, and it's community-based. It's no different than other cooperatives in that there's a real emphasis on member capital and member control. But in the member capital, profit comes back to members. There's a particular focus on savings and building of assets, whether at the group level or at the individual level. And the main role that these savings groups play is kind of a forced savings. They're trying to get it, frankly, out of their own hands, out of the hands of their husbands who might, I hate to say this, fellas, but drink it away or spend it. They want that money to be going to household emergencies and household savings. And so it's getting it out of the hands of making it less accessible. And this is in access where there's very little other opportunity. Member control, there is ownership, decision-making, and governance, but there's a real range of models in terms of the governance that plays out across communities. And again, it's highly cultural and highly contextual, how they decide to govern themselves. But the real emphasis is on the capacity of members to make informed decisions themselves. Some will lend out to non-members in the community because there are no financial institutions. Some will make collective investments. What I want to stress is I think that the story of the savings group is really interesting for us in the cooperative community because it's an innovation in any context. And not to say that there aren't challenges. But both the results and the process, I think, are quite interesting. The enormous scale and outreach. Of the savings groups that we have reported, there's about 6.6 million. That's across Africa, Asia, and to a lesser extent, Latin America. That's not including the millions that are informal and not reported in any form through an Oxfam or a Save the Children, for example. Access in remote rural areas, as I said, it's really reaching out to remote areas where there's not another option. Higher return on assets, according to the 4.8 million in the SAVIX database, the annualized average return on assets was 34%. That's a pretty good rate on your money, no matter what type of banking you're doing. And I don't know what, if we compared that to our returns, but I certainly know personally I may not be getting that high return. Higher savings to loans ratios, these women save. I cannot tell you. If there's one thing that I'd love you to take away from this presentation, people say, well, you know, when some of these people are living on $1 a day or $2 a day, and they save. Their capacity to save astounds me, because we have become net borrowers to an astonishing rate. I think we're struggling to keep at, 4% now? I'm not sure what it is. But their average is 6%, and 6% of their GNI, or their gross national income, and we're talking about people that are nowhere near that at a per capita basis. So extremely, they're saving a lot relative to their income. And the process, so we have, studies have shown that hot money, and I'm kind of preaching to the converted here, but hot money or members' own money is much more likely to be well governed than money coming from the outside. So what we've learned in our research is, if these members are mobilizing a certain amount of their own pot, their own internal pot, they can leverage, they can link to banks and other external funds, but the ratio is important and the timing is important. It's important that they have the hot money first. And studies show that they safeguard it better. We call the external money cold money. It's important both for the social cohesion and the business model. Some developments to watch. Group accounts, mobile banking is through the roof in particularly Africa. Kenya is one of the most innovative models. 70% of Kenyans are mobile banking. I don't know what percentage of Canadians, but again, I would hazard a guess it's lower. That's 13.3 million people in Kenya are mobile banking. They said that the transactions for mobile banking exceed Western Union's global transactions for a year. Savings groups linked to bank. In India alone, 4.8 million savings groups are linked to formal financial institutions. So now, I don't want to underplay, there are challenges there, and the challenges have come in where some of those relationships have caused the groups to become over-indebted. So over-indebtedness is an issue as much with savings groups as it is with any of us. Producer associations, linking back to Gavin's work, increasingly, I think another important message is, I think small is incredibly beautiful, but we've certainly seen that small is not enough. These savings groups have their small business in these informal markets. They're still part of a system. So there's a lot of work being done linking savings groups or overlapping savings groups and producer associations, linking them to value chains, alternative fair trade markets, etc. Savings groups form a basis for social programs like distribution of mosquito nets in Mali, solar lamps, literacy programs, HIV/AIDS programs. There's a concern that we might overload these groups because they provide such a nice network, but there's a lot of good work being done. And the last interesting innovation is oral bookkeeping. In Mali, because of literacy levels and numeracy in the formal sense, they use an oral bookkeeping system. So it's a memory-based system where they keep it very simple, and you say, I've saved this certain amount at this meeting, and I'm memorizing that Joseph has saved this amount. He's saved 3 shares, I've saved 2 shares, and I memorize that the total amount of savings we have for this group is this amount at this meeting. And they keep transactions very simple. Everyone saves the same amount, so memorization is easy. They keep the terms very, very short. Yeah, I think, thank you. Just suddenly ended.
Okay. Our next presenter is just Joanne.
All right. Do you have the French slide? So we're going to go from Malawi to Middleton. What I'm going to be talking about is a project that was based here in Nova Scotia. It was funded by the Nova Scotia Department of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, and the research was actually conducted by the Nova Scotia Office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and my business was subcontracted to conduct some of the analysis and writing. So why I'm here, I'm not sure, but yeah. So first, I'm just going to give a really brief overview of the research. Then I'm going to describe some of the case studies that we developed, and I'm going to end with the recommendations that we presented to government as a result of the work. Thanks. So the objectives of the research were to advance our ability to assess and capture the contribution of social enterprises in Nova Scotia, to provide data about social enterprises to raise awareness of their contribution to community development in the province, and to provide the enterprises themselves with snapshot reports that they could use to support their work, and to identify some of the successes and lessons learned around social enterprises in the province. So we used interviews and questionnaires and some background and internal documents and media reports, and we used those to create case studies and performance snapshots that were based on the Demonstrating Value project out of BC. The actual enterprises that were selected for the case studies were chosen in consultation with the department, and they were chosen in order to capture a sense of the diversity and complexity of this sector in Nova Scotia. So I'm just going to dive right in now to the case studies. The first one that I'd like to tell you about is Hope Blooms, which is a program of the North End Community Health Centre here in Halifax. And they use a community garden to help youth learn about food issues, and the youth use the items grown in the garden to produce salad dressing, which they sell in their neighbourhood and at the Halifax Farmers Market. So as you can see, the program started with 9 youth in 2008, and last year there were 34 youth and 14 families involved in the program. So they take the profits that they generate from the sale of the salad dressing, and they put those in a scholarship fund for the participants. And each year, a portion of the profits are also donated to a community cause that the participants themselves select. Part of the program is also the youth attend a business school held by the Black Business Initiative. So their sales last year in 2011 were $14,000, and they actually could have been higher, but they were unable to meet the level of demand that they had for the salad dressing. So the next group is Le Transport de Clare, which is a nonprofit enterprise operating in the municipality of Clare in Digby County. And they offer door-to-door, scheduled, on-demand, and charter bus service. They have a fleet of 4 vehicles with a combined capacity of 8 wheelchairs and 46 passengers. And the enterprise actually grew out of the Clare organization representing persons with disabilities. And they have identified persons with disabilities as a priority population, but the service is actually available to anyone in the community. Their ridership has grown from 8,500 in 2002 to 19,000 in 2011. So 70% of the ridership were individuals with disabilities, but 10% of their ridership were seniors, which is actually the fastest growing market that they serve. Le Transport has made really good use of government research grants, and they commissioned a transit enhancement study in March 2011, which helped them identify some of the key markets in their community. And they've been able to diversify their revenue sources, with 40% of their revenue coming from fares and contracts, 16% coming from donations, fundraising, and sponsorships, and grants from various levels of government, making up the remaining 44% in 2011. Our Time is a nonprofit enterprise that operates a cafe and catering business in downtown Dartmouth. And it's a program of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Nova Scotia, which provides training in food service to women and female youth who have been in contact with the criminal legal system or who are at risk of being in conflict with the criminal legal system. So participants at Our Time receive a monthly stipend. They get training in the food service industry and additional training that includes computer courses at the local library, self-esteem training, and training on healthy relationships. So since 2007, Our Time has had 546 catering jobs. And between 2008 and 2011, 68 women have successfully completed the program, and 60% of the participants have gone on to get employment or to seek further education. Flower Cart is probably one of the longest operating social enterprises in the province. It was founded in the 1970. They provide inclusive employment opportunities through a number of businesses in the Annapolis Valley. They have a range of services and supports, including a pre-vocational program, a vocational program, a community employment program, and employer services. Last year, in 2010-2011, they served 282 clients. 111 jobs were secured by their clients, and 49 of those jobs were permanent. Flower Cart's total revenue in 2010-2011 was $3.14 million, with a net surplus of more than $125,000. And their product sales actually accounted for just under 50% of the total revenue. Just Us is a member-owned cooperative that includes a coffee roastery in Grand Pré and coffee houses in Halifax and Wolfville. And they take a triple bottom line approach that measures social, financial, and environmental impact. When they post profits, the surpluses are redistributed to producers, employers, and members, and reinvested into the co-op. They've implemented a living wage, which is a minimum wage of 6% above Nova Scotia's minimum wage for its employees, and they have worked to increase the number of women in management positions, up from 1 in 4 in 2009 to 3 of 5 in 2010. In 2010, just over $90,000 was invested in employee training. So in developing these case studies and snapshots, we identified some challenges and opportunities facing social enterprises in the province. The first challenge is a limited capacity to engage in data collection and analysis. This challenge was perhaps best exemplified by our time. They operate with very few resources in comparison to the level of programming they offer, and the co-managers are occupied in running a cafe, providing supports to women, writing funding proposals and reports, attending Elizabeth Fry staff meetings, and attending meetings or events related to the work of the cafe. So requesting data from these staff is just adding one more thing to their huge list of responsibilities. We actually had to take a break from data collection during the Halifax transit strike because the managers of the cafe were driving the women from their homes to the cafe, so they had a lot on their plate. So one of the things that we found was that many of the enterprises would like to establish more formal processes for documenting their successes, but those activities are secondary to the main goal of running the enterprise itself, and it's often outside of the skill set of the individuals who are involved. Another challenge is the tendency to rely on and privilege quantitative measures over qualitative data. So traditional metrics related to financial success are generally simpler to understand and implement, and all of the social enterprises included in the study when we contacted them were easily able to provide their total revenue, total costs, and gross profits. However, this didn't always capture the true impact or the value of the enterprises. Most of them had not recorded the total number of volunteer hours invested or the impact on the quality of life for the individuals involved. So those things are not as easily measured, so they often get left out. Opportunities. There are lots of opportunities here in terms of being able to increase the balance between the social mission and the sustainability of the business. And developing the performance snapshots helped in creating that balance by providing a platform to showcase the social mission performance. And developing a system for data collection and reporting the successes of the enterprises can also provide an opportunity to focus the efforts of the organizations involved. That opportunity to share stories about change is a really powerful tool to be able to have. I'm going to skip through here. One of the things that we did through this piece of work was to talk about some of the key principles of measuring success of social enterprise, but I'm going to skip that slide, and if you have questions, we can talk about it later. So in terms of recommendations, we, for this project, were asked to make recommendations to government, and one of the things we recommended was that the snapshots that we created be used to continue to capture a range of qualitative and quantitative measures. we recommended that the government provide interest-free repayable loans that would provide emerging social enterprises with the ability to capitalize on opportunities for growth and to enhance organizational stability. And we certainly are happy at this point to be able to commend the government for the announcement that social enterprises do now have access to small business loans through the provincially funded Credit Union Small Business Loan Program. I'm going to again, keep skipping forward here. One of the things that we mentioned was that government is well positioned to provide supports to social enterprises through expertise, the expertise that they have, whether it's in business development, website use, or public relations. And they're also well positioned to broker partnerships between social enterprises and other public sector agencies or private sector firms. The other recommendation that I would like to point out is that government give preference to social enterprises in procurement policies because any difference in costs would certainly be mitigated by the positive effects of investing in social enterprises through the province. So I think when we were looking at all of the different enterprises that we profiled, the diversity of them really speaks to the province's long and rich history rooted in the cooperative movement, and it speaks to the ability of communities to respond and build programs and services uniquely connected to community need. And we hope that the recommendations based on the findings of this research will increase the sustainability of the enterprises currently working to improve the social, environmental, and economic situations across the province. So I want to thank you for your time today, and if you're interested in learning more about this, I would encourage you to talk to Joseph or to contact Dr. Christine Saunier at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives to answer any of your questions. Thanks.
Okay, our next presenter will be Mike Teckham.
Hello. Alrighty. Well, it's Friday afternoon, and pretty much you said one sentence, which sums up my whole presentation, is that procurement, Nova Scotia government has procurement that is directed towards social enterprises. So we could leave it at that and go home, but maybe now that we're here, I could just get into this a little bit. My name is Mark DeCamp. I work for the Nova Scotia Department of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. I recently started this role in January. I don't know how much longer I could consider myself the new guy, but I still do. And seeing work that you guys do and with the cooperatives and social enterprises, it really is uplifting. And just watching these presentations today, there's a real sense that the work you do is thanks, Joseph. You guys are making change in a positive way, and I think everyone should be commended for that. So well done. So all that aside, this is a presentation, Social Enterprises Sustainable Procurement. My role is a Sustainable Procurement Coordinator. So I'll move this forward. So in a nutshell, the province spends a lot of money each year buying goods and services and construction, and what we want to do is we want to buy products that are cleaner, we want to buy products from Nova Scotians, and we want to buy products that are less expensive. So that's the focus, and that sums things up a little bit, right? So in 2008, I believe, you've heard of the EGSPA, Ecological Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. And a big part of that, there's a number of overarching goals that all government, provincial government has to look into, and one of them was to create a sustainable procurement policy. So right away, immediately, government doesn't normally do this. We achieved a goal right off the bat. We created the sustainable procurement policy. This is before my time, but this is a very important piece of work. All procurement decisions consider the benefit to the environment and social fabric of Nova Scotia. That's key. Every capable Nova Scotian has the opportunity to do business with the government, and emphasis on obtaining best value versus lowest cost. So does that make sense, the best value, a little bit? So before, what we did is procurement decisions were just made, what's that? Yeah, on lowest cost, right? So all the bids come in, whoever has the lowest cost, go with those guys, right? Not no more. Now it's best value. So this makes a lot of sense in terms of sustainability, because you have you want to buy products that maybe more durable in the long run, make more sense on a business model to maybe spend a little bit more up front if they last longer, or they have other intangible benefits socially or environmentally. So that's best value is a focus now of how we spend money. My boss took that photo too, so I put that in there. So purchasing from social enterprises. After the policy came out, what the group did began by looking at what the province currently purchases from social enterprises, looked at what social enterprises offered, promoted purchasing from social enterprises internally. So a lot of people that did purchasing within government weren't aware of what they could buy or what services were offered from social enterprises. So this was significant considering, I mentioned before, we spend a lot of money each year buying goods and services in construction. The last I heard, it's over $1 billion a year, and we are a significant buyer, and we want to do this as sustainable as possible. So procurement is the tool, right? That's the tool for us. That's how we focus our efforts. So how can we make procurement sustainable? So that's the tool. These are some examples of some goods that are purchased from social enterprises. Social enterprises do a lot of woodworking. The province has bought a lot of survey stakes. Kit and document assemblies, I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. Goods for the protocol offices. So a lot of social enterprises create crafts, and these are in the protocol office. So if there's a conference that the province puts on or something and they want to give an award to a presenter, like these fantastic people, they might get something from the protocol office, and it's from a social enterprise in Nova Scotia. That's special. Document printing functions, so putting conference kits together, something like that. The bags that everyone got, that's something that a social enterprise can do. Document corrections, so sometimes we have a new strategy or policy or a document that comes out, and it's 400 pages, and then on page 62 there's a typo. So instead of scrapping everything, that document correction function can be done by a social enterprise. That's one example. Catering is a good example. We created a sustainable catering guideline. So it's just an informal briefing that we did, and it was just here are some social enterprises that if you're a department that hosts a lot of meetings or functions or something like that, you might want to get your catering from one of these organizations. And maintenance services, seasonal yard work, things like that. Those are just some examples. We also have Nova Scotia Environment. I'll go through this quickly. The Environmental Home Assessment Program, the RFP that was created was limited to social enterprises, and that was $260,000 per year, split amongst 4 organizations. Energy efficient kit assembly, so this one was before my time, but I think if you remember those boxes with the LED light bulbs and weather stripping and guidelines on energy efficiency in the home, a kit like that was put together. But kit assembly, we just did a case study on this one, and another example of that is this is a fantastic role for social enterprises. So you might have a task that's very labor intensive and hands-on that requires quite a few people just to be doing the same task over and over and over and over again, stuffing conference bags or envelopes or something like that. This is a service that could be outsourced to social enterprises, and it's something that they've done very well. They've been very reliable, very cost efficient. So another example is Cape Breton Regional Municipality. I think this is an example that we used. They created these recycling kits. So they made a change in the garbage program. So instead of having a few bags that you could throw to the curb each week, it was 1 bag. And they wanted to divert some of the waste from the landfill to a recycling program. So they needed to create these recycling kits. So they had a social enterprise. I think it's Horizon Achievement Center. I think that was I believe that is, yeah. So I think over 3 months they created 35,000 kits that went out to homeowners, and these kits had clear bags for paper, blue bags for recycling, and a little note of these are the changes, this is what's happening, and this is how you can have less waste on the curb. So 35,000 kits over 3 months, that's significant. So that's just an example. Social enterprise strategy. Joseph's doing a lot of great work on this. Again, it was before my time, but there are a number of objectives in that strategy that are very closely aligned with what we want to do out of procurement. So this gives us an opportunity to work with more social enterprises, but also gives us an opportunity to work on an exciting project like the strategy. So it links nicely with our existing work. That's on our radar. Can we purchase from social enterprises? This is important. This is an important part of the talk. We have a number of rules that lay out what we do, trade agreements, policies, and acts. And I talked about the sustainable purchasing policy, but we have trade agreements, the Atlantic Procurement Agreement, Agreement on International Trade, Canada-US Procurement Agreement. They all have, how am I doing for time? I haven't got the 5 minutes yet, right? I got 5 now? Okay, now we're moving. Yeah. Okay, so the trade agreement, high-level support on purchases over a significant amount of cash value thresholds. So I'll just leave it at that. The Public Procurement Act. This one was quite recent in 2011, and right there, page 1, section 2, we want to promote sustainable procurement and procurement decisions, including identifying and exploring opportunities to work with and support social enterprises. This is right at the beginning of the Act. And the sustainable procurement policy, which has if anyone works for another government or another organization, you may have your own procurement policy, but for ours, it gives a Nova Scotia preference. Items that may be in the best interest of Nova Scotians. It can direct purchases to Nova Scotia social enterprises and minority businesses, and policy support and specific tools for purchasing from social enterprises. But that's our purchasing policy. So that sums that up very quickly. Usually we spend more time on that, but we went through in record time. In a nutshell, trade agreements have exemptions, purchasing, like I said, Procurement Act, high-level support, purchasing for social enterprises, and the Sustainable Procurement Policy provides policy support and specific tools for the procurement. There's a lot of support rooted in legislation and policy already that helps the province purchase from social enterprises. That's the message. One of the first things we did when we got here, when I got here last January to the new department, new role, was to create this social enterprise procurement services working group. Joseph sits on this as well. We meet approximately quarterly. We have terms of reference, and essentially the main thing that we want to do is get government departments together. We want some social enterprises at the table, leaders amongst those groups, and we want to solicit input, and we want to create a friendlier business environment, and that's what we want. That's the goal of that group. It's hosted by us. Again, the main question is how can we help social enterprises do business with government? What the working group does, it looks at issues and opportunities, purchasing rules, and we developed our own objectives. So the issues and opportunities, and this is, I believe this is the last slide. No, there's one more. Yeah, so essentially we learned that social enterprises don't necessarily understand how government procurement works. Makes sense. It's not the most exciting stuff to get into, but our role is we have to explain that a little bit better. So, and social enterprises don't know how government does business, but on the other hand, we're realizing government doesn't know how social enterprises do business. We're trying to link the two together. Last slide right here. So these are the goals of the working group: promote awareness of the purchasing procedures, promote awareness of social enterprises to internal government staff, disseminate information on how social enterprises can better do business, and lastly, work with groups that are cataloging all the hundreds of social enterprises that are around the province, the goods and services that they provide, and we want to create, if there's catalogs or lists or things like that out there, we want to be able to get that information on the website so purchasers can see what social enterprises do. So that's it. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
Bon, pour les présenteurs, nous vous remercions pour les présentations très brillantes. Thanks a lot to the panelists for the brilliant presentations. So now, I'm not going to spend too much time to summarize what they have said because I want to give a lot of time to all of you to engage them. But as you saw, 4 interesting presentations. One first from an academic perspective, but interestingly, he talked about some of the values that social enterprises offer, and also the debate around what is a social enterprise, their relationship with cooperatives, and which is interesting why we are here today trying to look completely in a broader scope to look at the social economy. And I think one point that he made also that is interesting is when you talk about the social economy, there is an issue around ethics, and I think this is where people are mainly attracted to the social economy. Business is good, but can we make it to be more socially conscious? So he talked about fair trade and that kind of thing, which is very interesting. And then we had Nanci, who gave us another interesting perspective. So she did show us examples, different models in developing countries. And I think one important point that I will point out in her presentation, we did see what you will call maybe rudimentary processes, for example, in terms of saving. But you did also see something that is also very innovative with mobile savings. So perhaps, I don't know how that can be, but what is interesting there is that people in Africa using telephones to do savings, to do transactions, do banking, etc. So they're very, very innovative and something that is interesting to look at. And then we have Joanne, who really spoke to something very interesting. One of the debates around social entrepreneurship and cooperative, the social economy, is why are they not able to articulate what they do, their contributions? Why all these organizations cannot clearly, effectively articulate the contributions they make to the economy? If you call a Walmart here today, they will tell, oh, we create there, we put 400 people working there, we pay them, blah, 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 we create these jobs. And social enterprises struggle to articulate the contributions they make to the economy. So she spoke to that. And then we have Mike, who gave us a government perspective on procurement services that government can offer to help stimulate social enterprises and cooperatives in terms of purchasing, selling their services to government. Just a little disclaimer. So Joanne's presentation, that work is sponsored by government, but as traditionally we say, all the ideas and recommendations articulated in there are the views of the consultant and not government. Yeah. So thank you. Now we open the stage for questions. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for very interesting presentations, but I just want to actually ask Mark kind of a technical question, which is, what's the criteria for being classed as a social enterprises? Co-ops are or are not social enterprises? I mean, there's a big debate about that, so since this is a cooperative conference, I'm just wondering how that social enterprise definition fits with cooperatives.
Sure.
Or Joseph, whoever.
Well, I'll start this, but I'll also say, I asked Joseph the same question about 2 hours ago. So, Joseph, do you think you can handle this one?
Yeah, and so many of you know there is a big debate around the world about what is a social enterprise. So I think Mark anticipated that before he took the stage. He asked me how these cooperatives are different from social enterprise. So I would tell him what I told him. What I told Mark is that from a government perspective for now, if you want to know what is a social enterprise and a cooperative, in a lot of regulations and legislation in government, there are stipulations that govern, for example, the Societies Act in terms of incorporating a cooperative. So we have frameworks in place. Social entrepreneurship is still coming up, and so for now, in Canada, in BC, they have started to do some work, and in Nova Scotia, actually, I think next week, according to what I was told, I sit on a committee that has been looking at introducing a new legislation to copy what they do in the UK, in the States. In the UK, they have models, they have the community CICs, community interest companies. So what those do, they are social enterprises. What they do, you sign an agreement with government just to close some loopholes that all of the profits that you're going to generate are not going to go in one person's pocket, but interested to support communal activities. So I'm not going to, we don't have, I don't want to say that there is a clear-cut fixed definition for social enterprises, but what I can say that social enterprises, co-ops, et cetera, are all within the broader social economy, and that's the reason why we are here. So what Mark is doing, the work that we are doing around purchasing, actually cooperatives included, they can purchase, they will benefit from the framework that has been created.
Hi, great presentation. I'm curious to know whether there's an opportunity to transition some of the social enterprises in Nova Scotia into cooperatives. And I think it was mentioned this morning that, and I took it in the context of succession planning and so on, that some businesses are actually transitioning to a worker co-ops. So is there an opportunity to transition some of these social enterprises into cooperatives and so to build capacity and empowerment? And you've talked of some that have sales in excess of 3 million. So is there an opportunity, and if so, can that be identified and transitioned?
So that question doesn't have to necessarily go to the panelists. If anybody wants to answer that. Anybody wants to speak to that? She's asking whether there is a plan for social enterprises to transition into co-ops. I don't think that's the objective I would be thinking, but somebody wants to speak to that?
Could it not be an objective?
Oh, okay. So somebody wants to answer? Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the rationales for seeing a social enterprise being transformed into a cooperative is the notion of member participation. And so rather than, again, a social enterprise, which is generally a top-down enterprise controlled by a board of directors that isn't directly involved in receiving the benefits, one of the attractions of looking at the option of them becoming cooperatives is that the people that actually deliver the services, work within the enterprise, can become the owners and become, participant in a fashion that it goes beyond simply being an employee and receiving a service, but actually becomes an owner within the enterprise, still delivering the service in the same fashion, but having a very different relationship.
And I will give it to Lynn that she was the inspector of cooperatives. So.
In Nova Scotia, we have over 5,500 active societies, and one of the things about societies is that they do good work. That was it. But they generally are not allowed to engage in business. So often when I had people calling up and deciding to become societies, and they had some sort of business aspect to it, I would often direct them to I was joint stock, to the co-op council, or I would talk to them myself depending on the circumstances and advise them that they might be a good candidate to adopt the cooperative model, whether it was for-profit or not for-profit, because it doesn't really matter. You're still a social enterprise, whether you're for-profit or society or not-for-profit cooperative. So yeah, you can definitely be, if you want to engage in business, the cooperative model is one of the best ways to go at the current time. Is that adequate?
A question? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Joseph, maybe I can just add something too. Sure. And I'm sure, as you know, hundreds of social enterprises around the province. Like the ones that I've come across too, the leaders of these groups are, I'm always impressed by how organized they are, and they looked at how each of them has their strength, and they kind of run with that. So they're all diverse organizations, and they all try to make their own way as best they can. So they put a lot of thought into what business model they have, but the diversity is just amazing. So that's a good question. Yeah.
Just two quick questions, one for Mark and one for Nanci. Mark, has the government of Nova Scotia looked at the European Free Trade Agreement, which, as was pointed out earlier, has nothing to do with freedom and less to do with trade? But have they looked at that agreement that's being drafted to see what impact it will have on the ability of the Nova Scotia government to give any preference to social enterprise? So that's the one question. And for Nanci, have you seen Milford Bateman's critique on microfinance, and can you comment on it?
I'm getting better at getting up from that crowded chair to here. So to answer your question, no, I have not looked at that agreement. But a big part of the role is to do research. So we've done we've done our kind of baseline look at globally what other jurisdictions have done with social enterprises. Scotland comes to mind. Some of the work that they've done like within their own country, right? So, but like an EU type thing, no, haven't looked at that just yet. But you put it on our radar, and I'll look into that for sure. I'll give you my card too when I step down here, and maybe if you have other particular specific things that I should look at that agreement, I definitely will. So yeah, good question.
Hi, Tom. Yes, I did actually read his critique, and in fact, he was here presenting it, and the Media Co-op interviewed me to respond to it. One of the challenges, I mean, in the same way social enterprise and co-ops kind of have this blurry interface, so do cooperatives in which savings groups would be included, and microfinance. And so my response to it was, in microfinance, so what he's speaking to is a book that really called into question microfinance, because microfinance has seen a lot of the problems that regular finance has: over-indebtedness, unethical overlending. So, my response was absolutely. In microfinance, I've seen good, bad, and ugly. But what I will say is the most powerful examples of good microfinance, and I think I can safely say there's a lot of good microfinance, has been in member-owned institutions, including formal cooperatives and right down to savings groups. And the reason is, profits are not inherently evil. It's what you do with them, and to what extent the members have the ability to really participate in that decision. So, I think that we weathered the storm a lot better in the member-owned community. But I'm also reticent to distance myself too much from microfinance, because I think there's some good practice being done in kind of the formal microfinance. But I think consumer protection and transparency needs to be a lot more explicit in codes of conduct when you're not working with member-owned. And even with member-owned, I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced cooperatives where, good governance is a challenge, frankly. So, yeah. Thanks for a good question.
And just before I give the mic to Justin, just one point, she made a good question, something just came to my mind that I didn't say. One of the problems is that social enterprises are not well organized like the way you have cooperatives, you have a council. So I think this is something that they are dealing with, but maybe, again, the objective should not be to create another organization. So there is that thought, and what is good is that cooperatives are very, very open-minded. This is what we have seen. So I would let you know that actually, The Nova Scotia Co-op Council, if you go on their website, you see they talk a lot about social enterprises, and it's interesting to know also that government is working with the Co-op Council to implement a $2 million loan guarantee for social enterprises. So the links are already there now. The identity issue, I think, is something that has to be community-driven. But government has a $2 million loan guarantee that is being administered by the Nova Scotia Co-op Council. So they are very, very open and supportive.
Thank you. This question is also for Nanci. Just really quick background. I'm from California, and when I was working there, one of my early blue-collar jobs was working in one of those parking lot recycling centers where lots of oftentimes very marginalized people come in to redeem. And so in that context, I developed some trust with those folks, my clients, and I got to see how sort of peer-to-peer lending in the parking lot there not only created this social cohesion, but also gave people a sense of self. And I noticed that a lot of these transactions were over really trivial amounts of money or marijuana or whatever else it was, but they clearly served this an important social purpose. So given that, and then also the obvious incentives to sort of socially in peer groups, encouraging savings. How would you say that what you've observed in international experience, how might that translate to, particularly with the informal savings groups, how does that translate or not translate very well to very low income North American communities, particularly in terms of their cultural equipment?
That's a good question. There's actually some of these informal, I am less, I have to say up front, I'm less familiar with this in the domestic context, but I know that I think he's out of Italy. I just heard about this work being done, and it's kind of helping people to organize under the same principles, savings and investment clubs. So some people are doing things like playing stocks in groups, in collectives, and other people are buying property, almost like a community land trust, but the same notion that people coming together, and it's in North America, it's in Europe. I wish I had more details about it, and I know a colleague of mine from Microfinance, she has an investment collective in Washington, a bunch of women who get together and do exactly that. And similar in that, all the principles are the same. So deciding rules of entry, deciding rules of distribution, deciding what happens if there's exit, and all of those profits. So much more complex, obviously, but I think it absolutely has potential to work. And like you said, people who kind of want to be outside of a formal system.
I just want to make a comment in regards to cooperatives and social enterprises and this specific conference. My name is Mark Sparrow. I'm a co-chair of the conference. So when it came time to organize and we started to try to brainstorm, well, what kind of topics do we want to talk about? This very topic we thought was very important, and we recognized that there are so many things that we have in common with other social enterprises from the cooperative perspective. But we also recognize that for many years that these social enterprises have been popping up, we haven't necessarily been talking to them a whole lot, and they haven't necessarily been talking to us a whole lot. And there's all kinds of readings out there about how this gap should be bridged. So when we got to sitting around our steering committee and talking about themes and sessions, this came up as something that we really wanted to talk about. So actually we took a step further, knowing that it's not easy for many social enterprises that are small nonprofit organizations. Well, they're not all small, as we heard, but when it comes to finances, to try to come to something like this. So we went a step further and secured some funding to offset the registration cost for 5 social enterprises in Nova Scotia to be able to attend. And to get them here, we contacted people like Andy Horsnell and David Upton, people that work with many social enterprises that are involved with the social enterprise councils, and got some emails, addresses, and asked them to share with their networks to let them know that there's this conference coming up, and yes, it's a co-op conference, but there's a session entirely about what are our mutual goals and our overlaps and maybe our differences. But I think we've got reasons to be optimistic because we're now seeing co-op developers and people like David Doughton who are very highly involved with social enterprises and the councils for social enterprises. Although there's none, I don't think, in Nova Scotia. There's an Atlantic Council. So I do think that we have much to be optimistic about. And for those who are here from social enterprises, and if the time comes that you have some kind of a conference of this sort, then please invite us or any of these types of things. Just this year, Andy Horsnell had organized with David Upton a number of social enterprise boot camps across Nova Scotia. So there was one at Cape Breton University, and the idea was you get a bunch of students together, you introduce the idea of social enterprises and cooperatives, which they click with like that, as we've seen at the youth conference here this week, and then they come up with an idea, a conceptual social enterprise or cooperative. We leave it up to them, but we at least make them aware that there are various options. But the Co-op Council is a sponsor of that. We're also sponsoring financially another upcoming social enterprise boot camp that's going to be taking place. So from our end, we're doing what we can to try to engage on the social enterprise side, and it's been having great results ever since. So we're not necessarily as interested in seeing them become co-ops. If they do, I guess that's great too. No, but many of them operate as they are fantastically, and they do a lot of good stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment.
All right, we can still entertain a few more questions. We have,
Actually, this is great because I'd love to follow up on that. My name's Scott Reed. I'm from Autism Nova Scotia. We actually run a social enterprise. So you wanted to talk with us, and we would love to talk with you. One of the very interesting things I thought of in hearing Joanne speak, like I'm familiar with Le Transport de Claire and I'm familiar with Flower Cart. What you're seeing in social enterprise is a lot of trends, specifically within areas of disabilities, is the idea that they're looking for, one, to help augment finances that are coming in for not-for-profits, for charities. But the second, and possibly the more important, is to provide employment for people with disabilities. And right now, we did a 2009 study, and it came out that employment was the #1 issue affecting specifically the autism community. And so the Promise of a Pearl, which we have, which is our social enterprise where we sell jewelry, you can find us online, there's our little plug. It sells jewelry, the people with autism make it, and they're able to be employed. And that's more important than actually just making money. So right now, we're probably breaking even, but we're giving them employment. And one of the other interesting things I saw is that earlier today, one of the #1 supporters of cooperative groups is the not-for-profit sector. And I think there's a lot of potential for collaborative efforts. Like right now we're seeing in Nova Scotia, there's a 20% rate of people with disabilities. That's the highest in Canada. Yet you're going to be hard-pressed to find any organization that operates at 20% hiring of people with disabilities. The employment sector is a huge thing. It's specifically where I work. But I think that maybe this is an opportunity, a chance to open up dialogue. There's an immense amount of opportunity to collaborate. There's also someone here from the DCS, and the government has a lot of hiring initiative programs, wage subsidies, grants for hiring people with disabilities, for opening up jobs, for doing training programs. We're always looking for collaborative partnerships. So I think this is a great opportunity maybe to think outside of the box, and maybe when you go back to your respective co-ops is to take a look outside of where you're regularly getting supplies, where you're regularly outsourcing work, where you're looking for employment, and seek out these not-for-profit organizations, because I would love to work with some of your organizations and see if there's more potential for collaboration. So thank you.